Have you ever watched a ghost hunting show and seen those investigators, creeping around in the pitch dark with all those blinking gadgets and wondered what those tools actually do?
Oh, yeah, it's such a specific aesthetic.
Right, because you have this group of people hunting the supernatural, looking for something completely outside the bounds of known physics, but they are carrying equipment that looks like it belongs on a construction site.
Or maybe deep inside a military bunker.
Exactly.
The visual contrast is just striking. You have the night vision green glow, the hushed whispers, the palpable tension of waiting for an entity from beyond the veil, and they are trying to quantify it using like a commercial-grade HEAC thermometer.
Yeah, it's wild. We are taking the most grounded, objective tools of our physical world and throwing them into the dark to hunt for something inherently elusive.
Which is such a fascinating paradox.
It is, and that paradox is the entire focus of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are pulling from an incredibly detailed reference guide titled ghosthuntingtwitment.pdf.
Provided by Savant Narrative Systems in Jeweltown.
Right, and it serves as this really comprehensive breakdown of the modern ghost hunting arsenal. And just to set the ground rules for you listening, our mission today is not to debate the existence of ghosts.
Right. No, we aren't looking to prove or disprove the paranormal here.
Exactly. We're dissecting the methodology. The focus is entirely on the improvised technical vocabulary these investigators have built.
Because the overarching theme of this entire document is that almost none of this equipment was originally designed for paranormal use.
None of it.
Right. I mean, this gear was engineered for electricians,
Yeah.
for film production crews, for soldiers.
They've essentially built a new language out of spare parts. It's a fascinating irony, using the strictest, most rigid scientific tools to track down something that completely defies physical science.
It really is.
But I mean, if you're dealing with something that might not even be made of matter, where do you even start? It seems like you can't just walk into a room and start scanning for spirits without knowing what the room itself is doing.
And that is exactly the foundational principle laid out in the methodology here. Before you can scan for unseen entities, you have to establish a rigorous physical baseline.
A baseline, okay.
Right? You have to ground yourself entirely in the mundane reality of the environment. If you don't know what the normal state of a room is, you have absolutely no framework for identifying an anomaly.
Which means doing a deeply unglamorous environmental audit. I noticed the guide highlights data loggers right out of the gate.
Yes.
And these aren't the flashy blinking lights, right?
Yeah.
These are devices that they just sit in the corner and continuously track temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure over the entire duration of an investigation.
Exactly. They're just building a massive spreadsheet of the room's atmosphere.
Okay, but why is that so important?
Well, think about the physics of an old, abandoned Victorian house. The ambient environment is wildly unstable.
Oh, for sure.
Barometric pressure changes as weather fronts move in. Wood swells and contracts with humidity, causing floorboards to snap and groan.
Which sounds exactly like footsteps.
Right. And drafts move through poorly sealed windows, creating sudden, localized temperature drops.
The classic cold spot.
Exactly. So if a data logger records a severe drop in barometric pressure at the exact same moment, an investigator reports feeling a sudden, heavy sense of dread.
You have a physical cause.
Yes, a physiological explanation. Rapid pressure changes can cause sinus pressure, inner ear imbalances, and headaches.
Wow. So they are essentially trying to rule out the weather before they blame a phantom.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like trying to do a home inspection on a haunted house to rule out a draft before you call an exorcist.
That is exactly what they're doing.
But the text also mentions air quality monitors, specifically tracking elevated CO2 levels and infrasound. And that feels like a much more serious physiological threat than just a pressure headache from a weather front.
Oh, it is significantly more severe. Let's look at carbon dioxide first. In spaces with poor ventilation.
Like a sealed basement.
Right, a sealed basement or an abandoned hospital ward. CO2 can pool in those spaces. And when human beings are exposed to elevated CO2 levels, even just slightly above normal atmospheric concentrations, it induces hypercapnia.
Hypercapnia, what does that do to the body?
The blood pH drops. This triggers an intense survival response in the brain, leading to dizziness, shortness of breath, severe paranoia, and in high enough concentrations, full-blown auditory and visual hallucinations.
Wait, actual hallucinations? Just from stale air?
Yes. So picture this. A team of investigators walks into an unventilated basement. They're on edge. They start breathing heavily from the adrenaline.
So they're churning out more CO2 themselves.
Exactly. The room fills with it, and suddenly everyone is panicked and seeing shadows moving in the corners.
Oh, wow. So they're literally creating the haunting with their own breath.
In a way, yes. And that is exactly why the air quality monitor is present. The investigators are actively looking for those natural, physiological explanations for these subjective experiences of dread.
They want to make sure they aren't just poisoning themselves.
Right. But the inclusion of infrasound monitoring is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this environmental baseline.
Now, infrasound, I know that refers to acoustic waves that fall below 20 hertz, which is the lower limit of human hearing, right?
That's correct. We can't hear it, but we can feel it.
I'm assuming industrial environments or high winds can generate it.
Yeah, wind vibrating across a chimney, traffic from a distant highway, or even something as mundane as a malfunctioning refrigerator compressor can generate really powerful infrasound waves.
And because they're sound waves, they just pass right through the building.
Because the wavelengths are so long, they penetrate walls easily. And here is where it gets crazy. When a human body is subjected to infrasound, it actually resonates with our internal organs.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Specifically, acoustic waves right around 18 to 19 hertz are dangerously close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball.
Wait, really? So if the sound wave matches the resonance frequency of the eye, the fluid in the eye actually starts to vibrate.
The eyeball literally slightly vibrates within the socket.
That is terrifying.
It causes a subtle smearing in your peripheral vision, and your brain interprets that optical smearing as gray, amorphous blobs moving just out of the corner of your eye.
So you literally see a ghost.
Combine that visual distortion with the profound sense of unease that infrasound causes in the inner ear, and you have the perfect biological recipe for a ghost sighting.
Wow. So the very first step of modern ghost hunting is actively trying to prove that the haunting is just a weird acoustic resonance from the highway next door.
Yeah.
Or a slow CO2 leak.
Right.
That is a surprisingly rigorous, methodical approach.
It has to be. Without that baseline, you have zero credibility.
Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
If an investigator claims that a cold breeze in the hallway is the spirit of a former patient, they first have to prove that there isn't a draft coming from a cracked window. They have to exhaust the physical to even begin to consider the metaphysical.
Okay, so let's say they've done the home inspection. The CO2 is normal. There's no infrasound coming from the plumbing. They've documented the mundane environmental factors and completely ruled them out.
Right, the baseline is clean.
Once we know the air isn't making us hallucinate, we have to look at what else in the room is unseen.
Exactly. We shift from tracking the physical environment to tracking invisible energy. This is the domain of anomaly detection, relying heavily on tools designed for industrial diagnostics.
Okay, so this is where we get into the classic gadgets that everyone recognizes from the television shows.
Yes, the heavy hitters.
The text lists EMF meters, specifically mentioning models like the KIA and the millimeter. Now, for an electrician, an EMF meter is an everyday tool.
Very common.
If you need to find a live alternating current wire buried behind drywall, or check if a microwave seal is leaking radiation, you use an EMF meter to detect the electromagnetic field.
And the mechanics of the tool are purely objective. Inside a device like the KII meter, there is a small coil of wire.
Just a basic coil.
Just a coil.
Yeah.
When that coil is introduced to a changing magnetic field, like the alternating current flowing through the wiring of a house, it induces a tiny voltage in the coil according to Faraday's law of induction. That voltage powers a circuit that lights up the LED display. Green for a weak field, yellow for moderate, red for a strong field.
But the ghost hunters aren't looking to fix faulty Romex wiring.
No, they are not.
They're looking for spikes that cannot be traced back to the fuse box. So the underlying theory they operate on, according to the text, is that an entity or a spirit either emits its own electromagnetic field or it draws ambient energy from the environment to manifest, causing a localized fluctuation.
Yes, and they apply that exact same logic to thermal energy.
Right, temperature.
The guide highlights thermometers and thermal cameras, specifically FLIR cameras.
FLIR, that's forward-looking infrared.
Exactly. FLIR uses microbolometers to detect infrared radiation, which is just heat, and translates that invisible thermal energy into a color palette our eyes can actually process.
Like the predator vision, red and orange for heat, blue and black for cold.
That's the one?
But instead of looking for a hot spot caused by friction in an engine block, they are scanning empty rooms looking for inexplicable cold spots.
Correct. They are operating on the theory that a manifesting entity pulls thermal energy out of the air, dropping the ambient temperature in a localized area.
Got it. And then the arsenal also includes Geiger counters, which, I mean, that operates on an entirely different physical principle.
Oh, completely different. A Geiger counter uses a tube filled with low-pressure inert gas.
Okay.
When ionizing radiation like alpha or beta particles enters that tube, it knocks an electron off a gas atom.
Okay, so it physically interacts with the gas.
Right. That creates an electrical cascade, essentially an avalanche of electrons that hits the anode and creates that distinct click sound. It is designed solely to find hazardous radioactive decay.
Which is wild to me. Using a Geiger counter to find a ghost is like using a metal detector on a beach to find buried treasure, but hoping it beeps for a pirate's curse instead of a discarded soda can.
That is a perfect analogy.
It requires a massive epistemological leap. I mean, an EMF meter just measures electromagnetic fields. It has absolutely no idea if the energy it is measuring is coming from an old electrical panel or a theorized spirit. It just lights up.
And that leap, that jump from objective measurement to subjective interpretation, is the core vulnerability of the entire methodology.
Right.
The tool simply lights up.
Yeah.
The human investigator has to provide the narrative. They're taking a reading of a real-world physical spike and assigning a supernatural meaning to it based entirely on context.
So if the EMF meter lights up near a power outlet, they write it off as a baseline read.
Yep.
But if they're standing in the middle of a dirt floor basement with the power cut to the entire building and that meter pegs to red, they label it an anomaly.
Exactly. They are relying on the absence of an obvious physical cause to justify a metaphysical explanation.
Wow.
And consider the psychological weight of that. The equipment provides a really powerful veneer of empirical authority.
Oh, absolutely. It looks like science.
It takes the deeply subjective, internal experience of being scared in the dark and anchors it to hard, undeniable data. A light blinking on a KDI meter is a verifiable physical event.
Right. It validates the fear. Like if I'm standing in a dark hallway and I feel a sudden chill, I might just think I'm being paranoid. My mind might just be playing tricks on me.
Sure.
But if I'm holding a FLIR camera and the screen shows a localized blue mass hovering right where I felt the chill, suddenly my fear feels scientifically justified. I have a machine confirming my dread.
It's incredibly validating. Yet, detecting a cold spot or an EMF spike is ultimately just an alert system. It's a tripwire.
Right.
It tells the investigator that a fluctuation is occurring at specific coordinates in the room, but it offers zero data regarding the cause of the fluctuation. It flags an anomaly, but it cannot communicate with it.
An invisible field doesn't speak. And human beings are narrative creatures.
Yeah.
We need more than a blinking light. We want a voice.
We want a story.
Exactly. We want to know why the field is spiking. And that drive pushes the investigation past passive environmental monitoring and into the search for actual auditory evidence.
The audio realm is where the investigation shifts into an attempt at active documentation. The objective isn't just to measure the anomaly anymore, but to capture something that can be played back, analyzed, and ultimately understood.
Okay, so the source material focuses on 3 distinct pieces of audio gear. First, digital voice recorders. And these are everywhere.
Ubiquitous.
Investigators use them to capture EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. Now, the text makes a really crucial distinction here. EVPs are audio anomalies that the investigators cannot hear in real time while standing in the room.
Right. The isolation of the EVP is what makes it so fascinating to investigators.
How so?
Well, they will stand in a completely silent room, ask a question out loud into the darkness, leave maybe 10 seconds of dead air, and hear absolutely nothing.
Just silence.
Total silence in the moment. It is only hours later, when they upload that digital audio file to a computer, compress it, amplify the volume, and run noise reduction filters over the background static, that they suddenly discover a voice responding to them.
It's like developing photographic film in a darkroom. The evidence is latent. You don't know what you've captured until after you manipulate the raw data.
Exactly. And to aid in capturing that incredibly faint data, the guide mentions the use of parabolic microphones.
Now, these are the large, dish-like devices you usually see on the sidelines of NFL games, right? To hear the quarterback.
That's them. A parabolic reflector relies on geometric physics. The dish is shaped as a parabola, meaning that any sound wave that hits the dish, regardless of where it strikes the surface, is reflected to a single focal point in the center.
Oh, that makes sense.
By placing the microphone element precisely at that focal point, you are funneling a massive area of acoustic energy into one tiny receiver. It acts as an acoustic telescope, amplifying incredibly faint, distant sounds far beyond normal human hearing capabilities.
Once again, we see the repurposing of existing technology. A tool designed for sports broadcasting, or perhaps military espionage, is deployed in an abandoned asylum to try and capture a whisper from 100 feet down a corridor.
It's brilliant in a way.
It really is. But parabolic mics and digital recorders are relatively straightforward. They just capture ambient sound. That brings us to the third audio tool in the guide, which operates on an entirely different, highly controversial principle.
Yes, the spirit box.
The spirit box.
Sometimes referred to as a ghost box. This device actively generates its own audio environment. The source text explains that these devices rapidly scan AM and FM radio frequencies.
Just scanning through the dial.
Right, but instead of locking onto a strong signal like a normal car radio would, the spirit box sweeps through the dial at a set speed, often jumping to a new frequency every 100 or 200 milliseconds.
So it's just moving incredibly fast. It produces this aggressive, constant bed of white noise, punctuated by harsh static, clicks, and the occasional microfragment of a broadcast.
Exactly, and the theory detailed in the guide is that voices emerge through this generated noise.
Wait, how? Like, they speak through the static.
The investigators believe that a spirit can somehow manipulate this raw audio static, or perhaps the radio frequency energy itself, to synthesize words in real time.
Wow.
Contrast that with the silent, latent nature of an EVP. A spirit box provides an active, real-time auditory barrage. An investigator asks a question, and within seconds, a voice supposedly cuts through the sweeping static to answer.
It creates the illusion of an immediate interactive conversation.
It does.
But consider the mechanics of what the device is actually doing. I mean, if you're rapidly scanning random AM and FM radio stations, you're quite literally tuning into active broadcasts.
Of course.
You're squeaking past sports talk radio, late-night preachers, commercials, and music. If the machine jumps frequencies every 200 milliseconds, it is going to catch syllables and fragmented words from human radio DJs.
It is a statistical certainty. You are basically dragging a net through an ocean of human voices.
Right.
The inherent challenge of the spirit box is separating an alleged paranormal manipulation from just a localized radio broadcast.
Isn't looking for a ghost in a spirit box just a highly technical form of looking at clouds and trying to find a face?
It's a very apt comparison.
You are bombarding your brain with a chaotic wall of random, fragmented noise. And the human brain is an aggressive pattern recognition engine. We are hardwired to find language.
You're describing the exact mechanics of auditory pareidolia.
Pareidolia.
Right. The human brain, specifically regions like Wernicke's area, is incredibly adept at filtering out noise to process speech.
So it wants to hear words.
It is an evolutionary survival trait. When presented with ambiguous, chaotic audio like a millisecond of a commercial broadcast caught between two frequencies of static, our brains will desperately attempt to force it into a recognizable word.
And that interpretation is heavily influenced by suggestion, isn't it?
Oh, massively.
Because if I'm standing in a supposedly haunted prison block, and I prime my brain by asking the spirit box out loud, "Are you angry?" and a split second of a radio commercial for a car dealership comes through saying the word guarantee, my brain might twist the phonemes of guarantee into hearing, "I am angry."
The power of suggestion in that scenario simply cannot be overstated. If one investigator hears a word and repeats it out loud, the brains of everyone else in the room will almost instantly reprocess the ambiguous audio to match the suggested word.
Wow. So the machine generates the chaos, and the human mind imposes the order.
Exactly. Now, from the perspective of the investigators, they argue that the speed of the sweep prevents full words from coming through from any single station.
So they claim the sweep is too fast for it to be radio DJs.
Right. If the sweep rate is fast enough, a multi-syllable word would require the voice to perfectly track across several different frequencies simultaneously.
Okay, I see their logic.
Yeah.
But even with that defense, you are still sifting for objective truth in a sea of manufactured chaos.
Which is why audio evidence rarely stands alone. Hearing a fragmented word in a wall of static or a faint whisper on a digital recorder leaves way too much room for doubt.
Yeah, you can always argue it was just a radio station.
And human beings are inherently visual creatures. If we hear a voice in the dark, our biological instinct is to turn and look. We demand visual confirmation.
But how do you shine a light on something that supposedly doesn't reflect the visible spectrum? You have to cheat human biology.
You do.
So the deep dive naturally progresses from capturing audio to capturing visual anomalies, relying heavily on optics that look beyond what the human eye can process.
Right. The source mentions night vision cameras as the standard baseline for low-light environments.
Which we've all seen.
Right. These rely on image intensification technology. Ambient photons, say, from moonlight or faint streetlights outside a window, enter the lens and hit a photocathode plate. The photocathode converts those photons into electrons. Those electrons are then accelerated through a microchannel plate, which multiplies them thousands of times before they smash into a phosphor screen.
And that creates the classic bright green image.
Yes, it massively amplifies the available light.
But the text also details full-spectrum cameras. Now, these are standard digital cameras where the internal IR and UV blocking filters have been physically removed from the sensor, right?
Exactly. They take a normal camera and modify it to capture ultraviolet light at the lower end of the spectrum and infrared light at the higher end.
So they're literally looking into the hidden wavelengths of light that our biology naturally filters out.
They are. And to help detect movement in those hidden wavelengths, investigators deploy laser grids.
Oh, I've seen these.
A small device projects a dense dot matrix of laser light, usually green or infrared, across an entire room. It maps the topography of the space in a grid of hundreds of tiny dots.
And the logic there is pretty elegant in its simplicity. If a shadow or a mass that's invisible to the naked eye passes between the projector and the wall, it will break the laser pattern.
Right.
The camera recording the grid will capture the dots disappearing and reappearing as the anomaly moves through the beam. It's a high-tech visual tripwire.
It's a brilliant adaptation of optics. But the most complex, the most fascinating, and arguably the most controversial visual tool mentioned in the entire guide is the SLS camera.
The structured light sensor. I've seen these used on investigations. They usually look like a modified video game controller mounted to a tablet.
And that's exactly what they are.
The text notes that the SLS is repurposed motion capture technology, originally developed as the Xbox Kinect.
Yes, the Xbox Kinect. The history of the Kinect is crucial to understanding why it is used this way. Microsoft engineers, specifically working with a company called PrimeSense, spent millions of dollars and years of research developing this hardware.
Right, for gamers.
The goal was to allow consumers to play video games using their own bodies without holding a controller.
So to make that work, the Kinect utilizes an infrared projector. It shoots out a structured grid of thousands of invisible infrared dots, much more complex than the simple laser grid we just talked about.
Far more complex.
A specialized IR camera reads how those dots deform when they hit objects, creating a highly detailed real-time 3D depth map of the living room.
But the hardware is only half of the equation here. The true magic of the Kinect is the machine learning algorithm running the software.
Okay, the code behind it.
Right. Microsoft trained that algorithm on millions of images of human bodies in various poses. The software looks at the 3D depth map and aggressively searches for the skeletal structure of a human being.
It's programmed to find people.
It wants to find a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs.
It's looking for the pivot points of human joints, the shoulders, the elbows, the knees. Once it identifies those pivot points in the depth map, it maps a digital stick figure over the shape, allowing the software to track your movements and mirror them on the TV screen.
It is an incredible piece of engineering designed for a very specific, mundane purpose.
Playing games.
Exactly. Now, take that highly specialized software, strip it out of the brightly lit living room, disable the video game interface, and carry it into a pitch-black, empty, supposedly haunted basement.
It's absurd when you think about it. You're taking a machine that was programmed with millions of dollars of research to let you play a virtual tennis game, and you were using its code to try and map the skeletal structure of a ghost.
And the problem arises from how the software functions when it is deprived of its intended input. The algorithm is relentless.
Meaning what? It doesn't turn off.
No, it is aggressively programmed to find human shapes. That is its singular purpose. If you point it at an empty room, the software does not simply shut down, it scans the environmental noise, desperately searching for a skeleton.
So if the investigator pans the camera across a room and the infrared grid hits, say, a pile of cokes resting on a chair next to a tall floor lamp, the 3D depth map gets messy.
Very messy.
The software analyzes that messy geometry and gets momentarily confused. It might calculate that the height ratio of the lamp pole to the bulk of the coats vaguely resembles the distance between a human torso and an arm.
And because the machine learning algorithm is biased to favor false positives over missing a player because you wouldn't want the game to just drop your character mid-swing, it forces a match.
Oh, wow. So it forces the shape.
It takes that random geometric clutter and glitches. For a split second, the software maps a digital stick figure right onto the coat rack.
It forces a pattern where no physical human exists. But to the ghost hunter holding the SLS tablet, they don't see a complex algorithmic failure.
Not at all.
They're staring at a screen in a dark room, and a digital stick figure suddenly manifests on the bed, waves an arm, and then collapses into a glitch and vanishes.
It is the ultimate, undeniable technological manifestation of visual pareidolia.
The machine is seeing things.
The machine is doing exactly what Wernicke's area does with the Spirit Box audio. It is hallucinating a human form out of the random noise of the environment, simply because that is what it was trained to do.
We've literally built a machine that is so desperate to see human beings that it will hallucinate them out of furniture. That is mind-blowing. The tool isn't detecting a supernatural entity, it's just trying to do its job on a pile of debris.
Yet you can understand why the SLS camera has become so deeply entrenched in contemporary ghost hunting culture.
Because it looks amazing on camera.
It provides the holy grail of paranormal investigation. A clear, real-time visual representation of the invisible. It gives the anomaly a recognizable human shape. It translates the abstract fear of the unseen into a quantifiable data point right there on a screen.
So we've tracked the progression of this technological arsenal. We started with the data loggers measuring the baseline physical environment.
The environmental audit.
Right. We moved to passive scanning, waiting for an EMF meter or a thermal camera to register a fluctuation. We tried to pull audio out of radio sweeps, and we used infrared optics to force a visual map onto the darkness.
The progression clearly moves from passive observation to active documentation.
So the final step in this methodology has to be interaction.
It is. The final category in the source material addresses exactly that, direct contact.
Direct contact.
This includes communication and trigger devices. At this stage, the investigation fundamentally shifts. The investigators are no longer just watching and waiting, they are actively inviting the anomaly to engage with the equipment.
They're setting traps for data.
Yes.
So the first device listed in this category is the REM pod. Now, earlier we talked about EMF meters, which are passive receivers. They just listen for ambient magnetic fields. The text explains that the REM pod is fundamentally different because it acts as an emitter.
Right. It generates its own localized electromagnetic field.
How does that work?
Think of the physics behind a theremin. You know, the electronic musical instrument you play without touching it.
Oh yeah, you just wave your hands near the antennas.
Exactly. A REM pod operates on a similar principle of capacitive sensing. It features a small antenna that broadcasts a weak, localized electromagnetic bubble around the device.
Okay.
And the device constantly monitors the baseline capacitance of that specific bubble.
So if a conductive mass, like a human hand, or theoretically an entity composed of energy, enters that electromagnetic bubble, it disrupts the dielectric constant of the field.
Yes, it changes the capacitance.
The REM pod registers that disruption and triggers an escalating series of LED lights and a loud, piercing alarm.
It operates as a highly sensitive proximity sensor.
Okay, so an investigator can place a REM pod in the center of an empty room, walk out, and monitor it from a remote camera.
Exactly. If the alarm sounds while the room is physically empty, it indicates that something invisible interacted with that specific, localized field. It isolates the anomaly, theoretically removing the chance of human contamination.
That's a clever way to do it. And speaking of removing complex variables, the guide highlights the use of trigger objects.
Yes, trigger objects.
This is a fascinatingly low-tech approach nested right in the middle of all this high-end gear. Trigger objects are mundane, everyday items. Toys, coins, playing cards, or personal effects.
The brilliance of the trigger object is in its simplicity and its psychological weight.
What do you mean by psychological weight?
Well, if an investigation centers on a historical claim of a child haunting a nursery, the investigators don't just set up EMF meters, they place a vintage doll or a rubber ball in the center of the floor.
They use something the ghost would recognize.
Right. They trace its outline on the floorboards, train a high-definition infrared camera directly on it, and they wait.
They're providing a familiar, era-appropriate object to entice an interaction. It's essentially bait.
It is bait.
But instead of setting a mousetrap, they are placing a 19th century coin on a table to see if the laws of physics are violated. If the coin moves outside the traced outline on camera, you have undeniable visual evidence of kinetic energy being applied by an unseen force.
It is the purest test of physical interaction. However, right next to this wonderfully simple analog concept of the trigger object, the source guide introduces what is arguably the most complex, opaque, and pseudoscientific device in the entire modern arsenal.
Let me guess, the Ovilus.
The Ovilus.
If the SLS Connect is the most controversial visual tool, the Ovilus is undeniably the most debated communication tool.
Without a doubt.
The source states that the Ovilus converts environmental readings like EMF fluctuations and temperature drops into actual words via an onboard phonetic database.
The Ovilus represents the absolute extreme end of this improvised technical vocabulary.
It's totally different from the rest.
Yep. It is. It's a device built exclusively for the paranormal field, unlike all the repurposed industrial gear we've discussed so far. To understand the controversy, we have to look at the massive leap in logic the software makes.
Break down that logic for me, because the machine is supposedly taking a cold breeze or a slight spike in an electromagnetic field and somehow turning it into the word demon or apple.
Yes.
How does a shift in ambient temperature correlate to human vocabulary?
Yeah.
That feels like trying to translate the barometric pressure into a Shakespearean sonnet.
It's a huge stretch. The internal software mechanics of the Ovilus are proprietary, but the foundational concept is a mapping algorithm.
Okay.
The device has an onboard memory bank containing a dictionary of thousands of words. Within the code, each word is assigned a specific numerical value or a complex range of variables.
So purely as a hypothetical, let's say the word apple is hard-coded to the numerical value of 50.
Precisely. Now, the hardware of the Ovilus contains environmental sensors. It is constantly reading the ambient temperature, the static electromagnetic field, and perhaps subtle changes in the device's own internal capacitance.
Pulling in all this data?
The software takes those environmental data points, runs them through an algorithm, and generates a number.
So if the temperature drops by 0.2 degrees and the EMF spikes by 0.1 milligauss, the algorithm crunches those variables and generates the number 50.
Right. And the software looks up memory address 50, finds the phonetic string for apple, and uses an onboard speech synthesizer to say the word out loud.
That is just, wow. The operating theory promoted by the device's creators is that an intelligent spirit can intentionally manipulate those environmental variables.
Yes.
They believe the entity realizes that if it lowers the temperature by exactly 0.2 degrees while simultaneously pulsing an electromagnetic field at 0.1 milligauss, it can navigate the device's algorithm to select the exact word it wishes to communicate.
That is the claim.
Consider the sheer cognitive processing power required for an invisible entity to achieve that.
It's staggering.
The spirit would not only have to understand the complex physics required to manipulate raw atmospheric temperature and electromagnetic fields simultaneously, but they would also need to intrinsically understand the proprietary C++ programming logic of that specific Ovilus device.
Right. They would have to reverse engineer the code in real time to know how to trigger a specific memory address.
It is an astronomical burden of logic. The Ovilus essentially acts as a digital Ouija board, but it replaces the physical movement of the planchette with the invisible fluctuation of environmental data.
That's a really good point. It claims the objective authority of a thermometer while delivering the highly subjective narrative of a synthesized voice.
And just like the spirit box, the true engine of the Ovilus is the human investigator, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because the machine spits out the words red, cold, and run over the course of 20 minutes. Those words are objectively completely disconnected.
Just random outputs based on slight drafts in the room.
But the investigators will instantly string those random database pulls together. They will build a cohesive, terrifying narrative about a murder that happened in the cold room.
Because the human mind is the ultimate sense-making machine. The Ovilus provides disconnected, mathematically generated prompts based on subtle room drafts, and the investigators write the script.
It is a masterclass in technological pareidolia.
Truly.
So looking back at the massive amount of material in this reference guide from Savant Narrative Systems, the overarching journey is just staggering. When we started, we were just looking at a list of gadgets.
Just a pile of equipment.
Right. But tracing the methodology from the data loggers to the Ovilus reveals something much deeper about modern supernatural investigation.
It reveals a profound shift in how we approach the unknown.
Yeah.
Modern ghost hunting has completely distanced itself from the ancient rituals, the mystic mediums, and the spiritualism of the Victorian era. It has replaced theology with an improvised technical vocabulary.
The source guide concludes on a really brilliant analytical note regarding this shift. It states that this repurposing of construction tools, film equipment, and military sensors is the defining feature of contemporary ghost hunting culture.
It is.
It provides a rich, authentic backdrop for modern horror fiction because it mirrors our modern reliance on data. We've essentially watched humanity create a brand new technological mythology.
We no longer sit around a seance table holding hands. We walk into the dark holding FLIR thermal cameras and arm pods.
We have built complex machines to quantify the unquantifiable. We demand empirical data, even from the afterlife.
Which is such a deeply modern impulse.
It is. Which leaves you, listening right now, with a really profound, almost philosophical question to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. We've looked at the SLS Connect cameras, aggressively programmed with machine learning to force digital stick figures out of shadows and furniture.
We've looked at the spirit boxes, mechanically spinning random radiostatic until our brains hallucinate a whisper.
And we've dissected the Ovilus, running a software script to translate a random temperature drop into a dictionary word.
All of these machines, at their core, are engineered to tirelessly search for patterns.
They are built to find human shapes, to find language, and to flag electrical anomalies.
They're pattern recognition engines.
Exactly. So the ultimate question is this. If we take highly sensitive machines designed to find human patterns and we lock them in empty pitch-black rooms, are they actually detecting the paranormal?
Or, by giving these devices the power to interpret the dark, are we simply recording the desperate programmed attempts of our own technology trying to find meaning where there is absolutely none?
Exactly. When that gadget lights up in the dark, are the ghosts actually in the room with us, or are they just ghosts in the machine?